Hello to students. My name is Jonathan Buckley. I am an additive manufacturing applications engineer for Joel USA. And today I'm here to speak to you about the electron beam melting industry applications, specifically focused on the medical device industry. Today, for the agenda, we will be going through a short overview of the electron beam powder bed fusion technology, and then go into how electron beam melting technology is used in the medical device industry today, including some examples of some specific orthopedic implants that electron beam powder bed fusion is used in. We'll also go through the process flow and manufacturing flow for electron beam powder bed fusion, a little bit into how the technology is qualified in a production setting, and then we'll end the presentation with a little bit about the lattice design, testing, and qualifications that are required for additive manufacturing and specifically electron beam powder bed fusion. Before we get into it, I just want to speak to a little bit to my background in 3D printing. I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and a master's in material science and engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts. I then started my industry experience in aerospace. I joined the aerospace industry for a company called Sikorsky Aircraft, where I was a materials engineer, and my primary focus was on gear steels and the special processes for those gear steels for heat treatment, including carburization, thermal spray, shot peening, and other processes such as those. I then joined the 3D printing industry when I joined Arcam, a Swedish company focused on electron beam powder bed fusion technology. I was an applications engineer in the US supporting customers around the North America region on their machine for training, customer support, development, as well as benchmarks. From there, I joined a additive manufacturing startup called Amplify Additive, in which we focused on contract manufacturing using electron beam technology for the manufacture of orthopedic implants. I joined and started the company and sold the company in 2022. From there, I had a short stint at a laser powder bed fusion company called Vulcan Forms before rejoining a electron beam OEM at Joel USA. A little bit of background on the company that I work for. JEOL stands for Japan Electron Optics Laboratory. And our experience hails from what is in our title, electron optics. We developed our first transmission electron microscope in 1949, and from there we have manufactured equipment using electron optics for the past 75 years, including transmission electron microscopes, scanning electron microscopes, mass spectrometry equipment, as well as our latest equipment in additive manufacturing, our electron beam powder bed fusion machine, which we released in 2022. We have 3,000 employees worldwide, and we aim to support our customers on a worldwide basis. As you are aware, and may have learned in your courses on additive manufacturing, I just want to go through the general basics of electron beam powder bed fusion and how it works. On the left side of the screen, we have a sample mock-up of an electron beam powder bed fusion machine. What we have is an electron optics unit, which generates our electron beam, and on the bottom is our build chamber, which houses the build process. We have a recoater, which spreads powder across the build plate, and we have a build platform that moves down based on the layer thickness that was selected. Layer by layer, what happens is between layers, the build platform lowers down by a layer. The layer of metal powder is spread by that recoater, and then from there, we turn on our electron beam. And what happens is, in our initial process, is the electron beam preheats that powder, and what we call sinters that powder by having a defocused electron beam scan across that powder bed. And by doing so, we not only increase the temperature of the powder bed, but we also sinter those powder particles together. After which, on step 4, we actually melt those cross sections via a typical contour and hatch scan strategy in order to weld those powder particles together and create our layer. From there, we repeat this process back to step 1, and we repeat that process layer to layer until we have our full part. So some specific differences between electron beam powder bed fusion versus what's more commonly understood, a laser powder bed fusion, is that we use electrons as our energy source versus a laser powder bed laser. We have our process in a vacuum environment versus typically a laser, you use an argon purge across the build platform. And lastly, in our process, which is one of the major differences, is that we keep an elevated powder bed temperature throughout our process, versus in most laser-based technologies, it's at ambient temperature. And there are some very unique benefits that we have by maintaining an elevated process temperature. So we at Joule have developed an electron beam powder bed fusion machine called the JAM 5200. It is a high productivity, high quality, and high efficiency manufacturing process. We use a 6 kilowatt electron beam in our process, and we move our electron beam via electromagnetic lenses, which results in a very fast and accurate beam speed and beam control. Our process is able to achieve excellent mechanical material properties while maintaining an excellent density in our melted parts. We, again, with our process, similar to other electron beam powder bed fusion technologies, maintain an elevated process temperature, which results in low to no residual stresses forming in our parts, and we do not have to have our parts connected to the plate. That enables us to utilize the entire build volume and allow to place our parts not only connected to the plate, but also off of the plate and around the full Z height of our build envelope. After our build is completed from the JAM 5200, our parts are surrounded in sintered powder, and that powder must be removed from the parts. And we use a powder recovery system to remove all the sintered powder from our parts. The powder recovery system is a large blasting cabinet that we use with air in combination with a nitrogen environment to remove that sintered powder and blast those powder particles off of our part. So you'll see next is a video of us blasting and removing that sintered powder. And all that sintered powder can be removed and recycled and reused into another build. And after all that powder is removed, we don't need any wire EDM or sawing to remove those parts from the plate. We also don't need any heat treat or stress relief after the process has been completed in order to remove the residual stresses that have formed within our parts. Now that we've gone over the basics of electron beam powder bed fusion, now I want to get right into the applications and how electron beam powder bed fusion has been used in the medical device industry. So for the medical device industry and how additive manufacturing is utilized in it, for those who are unaware, there has been an increased adoption rate overall for orthopedic implants and demand for orthopedic implants throughout the last 20 years. As we have a population around the world that is living much longer, there has been a lot more demand for medical devices to help meet the needs of the aging population. As arthritis cases grow, as cases for injuries grow, especially as you get older, there's more of a need for medical devices to help meet demands for people that may be dealing with cases where they have injuries or arthritis in the knee, the hip, spinal implants and spinal issues, shoulder issues, and implants such as orthopedic implants help to alleviate those issues with pain, with lack of movement, with more difficulties with walking. And that's what the arthroplasty and surgeries such as these help with. Now, additive manufacturing does offer some very unique benefits to the patients and also surgeons in being able to provide, in some cases, a better solution for developing and for surgeries to help potential patients. And specifically, Ti-64, of course, is a material due to its biocompatibility has been selected as a great alloy to use. But of course, there are many other alloys that could potentially be used for orthopedic implants. Powder bed fusion is one of the more commonly used technologies, additive manufacturing technologies, used in the medical device industry. And some of the benefits that it does have is, first of all, consolidated process steps. By using a powder bed fusion additive manufacturing technology, you have overall fewer steps that are required to get a near net shaped part. Whereas you may have for a traditional manufacturing, a few multiple steps that are required to machine a part down to near net shape. With additive manufacturing, you could produce multiple parts to get to near net shape with one process. And that consolidated process steps results in fewer steps that are needed to test and validate, and fewer potential process steps that could go to failure or could be a limiting factor to getting your parts out in time. Another benefit for powder bed fusion technology is really the lattice structures. The lattice structures we can see on the right, on the example for the foreweb and lean incorporate. These are structures that can be built while you are melting and building your part layer by layer. And those are specifically used in order to grow and have bone ingrowth and have bone facing surfaces which your bone can grow into and have your bone be a part of and integrate within your body. With those lattice structures, we can create some softwares that can optimize the bone ingrowth for faster bone ingrowth and faster acceptance of that implant into your body. That also allows us to prevent and skip a step such as plasma spray coating and other coatings that would be required for a traditional manufactured implant in order to use a traditional manufactured implant into the body. Lastly, this also allows us to be able to use what's called cementless implants. So typically for a traditional manufactured implant, what you would have to use in order to get the bone and to connect it to the implant is to put some cement, some bone cement in between in order to get some good initial fixation and a good connection between the bone and the implant. Now with additive manufacturing, it is now more common to use cementless implants. That allows us to save some good bone that may need to be removed during the surgery process. By having a cementless implant and having a great already surface between the bone and the implant, you also can avoid removing good bone that may be required to be removed in order to get the good bone to implant contact. Lastly, another good benefit for additive manufacturing is custom implants, which would be a little bit more difficult for traditional manufacturing due to the lead times that will be required to make a custom implant. With additive manufacturing, you're able to take a CT scan, do some initial designs, and be able to create your near net shape custom implant that is specifically tailored to a certain individual much faster overall than a traditional manufactured implant could do, and that is able to help potential patients that may be ordering or have to have a specific case for a custom implant. Specifically for electron beam powder bed fusion, electron beam powder bed fusion has been selected by numerous medical device industry companies worldwide for the specific manufacturing of implants. And this is really due to some very unique benefits that electron beam powder bed fusion provides that other technologies can't quite reach or have more difficulty reaching. For example, because electron beam powder bed fusion uses a electron beam, it results in a lot more efficient builds as a whole. As you can see on the right, this is a build that back when I was at Amplify Additive, we designed to build and demonstrate the capabilities of the technology. The hip cups, for example, being able to stack them between builds allows us between each build to get more throughput, more builds and more parts, and therefore meeting more customer demands for parts that they desire to have more parts overall in the build to build. So faster build completion, more parts per build, faster build rate. Also, in the process, not having to need a further post-processing step such as wire EDM or post-heat treatment allows us to get parts off and out and into customers' hands or into other partners' hands for post-processing after the builds are completed. That's a faster process as a whole to get parts from powder to finished product faster with less steps, which is highly desirable for many medical device manufacturers and designers. Now, I did want to speak to some of the benefits of using electron beam powder bed fusion, but of course, there are challenges with any selection of technology that you would like to utilize, specifically for the medical device industry. Some of the downsides and some of the room areas for improvement for the technology, because we are sintering the powder particles layer by layer. One thing to consider when selecting electron beam powder bed fusion for the medical device industry is the challenges for powder removal. So for example, in these final implants you have on the right that we manufactured at Amplify Additive, uh, because we are building that sintered powder, cleaning off that powder with the powder recovery system and blasting that powder requires a bit more of process control to ensure that powder is completely removed from that lattice structure. But not only by process control in blasting the powder, also how you inspect. How can you prove that each one of these these implants has had powder completely removed from the lattice structure in the internal passageways? Methods to ensure your process control and removal of all that powder is a bit more challenging for electron beam powder bed fusion to do the sintering. Whereas laser powder bed fusion, because there is no sintering, the powder particles can be more easily removed and easier to prove out that the powder has been removed and cleaned off from lattice structures. In addition, electron beam powder bed fusion technology does have a bit higher surface finish, more rougher surface finish, I should say, which actually in the medical device industry does have some bit more desiring because it is a bit easier for bone ingrowth and a good initial bone ingrowth due to the rougher surface and better connection between the bone. However, that could result in some areas you may need to have an improved surface finish to improve the fatigue properties and prevent crack growth in other areas. So more considerations for that. Lastly, if you do have a customer that does require the use of type 64 grade 23 or ELI powder, which is more commonly known to be used in the medical device industry, the electron beam powder bed fusion process does have a faster uptake in oxygen content due to it being at a higher temperature. The powder particles overall for Ti-64 are susceptible to moisture absorption if you're not careful. Putting that powder into the machine and then having the machine maintain that elevated process temperature can result in a slightly faster uptick in oxygen content from build to build. That has to have considerations in under case when you are going from build to build, ensuring that your powder oxygen content does not go over the specific case for example, Ti-64 grade 23, where the oxygen content cannot be a higher content than 0.13 oxygen content. One company that utilized electron beam powder bed fusion technology for their implant was a company called Ortho Fundamentals. And when I was at Amplify Additive, we had the pleasure of working with them on their SI fusion implant system. When they approached us, they were looking to utilize additive manufacturing for their screw, as you can see on the right, but needed help in terms of how to 3D print it, but also how to apply a lattice structure in order to use it for bone ingrowth. We worked with this company to develop, first of all, and design a lattice structure, as you can see on the right, by utilizing end topology and optimizing the lattice strut size and pore size to get excellent bone ingrowth. Also to confirm and make sure that the lattice structure had the appropriate mechanical properties in order to be able to be used in this application. After we worked with this company, we were able to qualify this lattice structure, use and print these implants for production, and we were able to achieve an FDA 510(k) clearance in support of orthofundamentals, approval through the FDA in April of 2022. This structure itself, this screw, was designed to compress and stabilize the sacroiliac joint during the fusion process, and is a self-tapping screw that we printed using the Q10 Plus. To give you some insight on this surgery, I will play this video on the right, and what you'll see first is a 2 to 3 centimeter incision is made, and then what's going to happen is we'll drill a hole, and the SI screw will go and attach to the SI joint and stabilize it. From there, the bone lattice will grow into the bone, and a very short surgery is happened in order to achieve and reduce pain within the patient. Another company that has been a leader in utilizing electron beam powder bed fusion for their additive manufacturing of implants is Lima Corporate, which is based out of Italy. They focus on patient-specific knee implants, but also have produced a significant number of acetabular cups for the medical device industry. They have a large number of electron beam powder bed fusion machines, 15 or so RCAM machines, maybe some more, and has worked with RCAM for almost 20 years. And actually, what's been reported is that over 100,000 patients alive today have electron beam powder bed fusion hip cups currently inside them. What they have developed themselves for their lattice structure is a lattice structure that's proprietary that they call trabecular titanium, that they have optimized to be utilized for bone growth of their implants into their patients that have these specific implants. Another example for electron beam powder bed fusion technology utilizer is Choice Spine, another company that we've had the pleasure of working with in the past at Amplify Additive. They utilize electron beam powder bed fusion for their spinal implants that they use Ti-64 grade 23 material. Their spinal implants for spinal fusion surgeries, and the idea is that the spinal implant will be utilized in between segments for spinal fusion to fuse two segments together. And they design a special lattice structure called BioBond for the bone ingrowth. The nice thing about electron beam powder bed fusion is, again, the roughness allows for very good initial fixation during the spinal fusion surgery and allows for better bone ingrowth, but also better and more efficient patient outcomes for ease of the patients after the surgery has been completed. In addition to that, because electron beam powder bed fusion can build parts and stack them on top of each other, it really is an optimal technology for spinal implants because you can fit a significant number of parts in one single build and allowing for fast build rates and a fast number of parts to come out build to build. Now that we've gone over a few examples of some companies that have utilized electron beam powder bed fusion for their implants, we'll next be going over the manufacturing process flow utilizing electron beam powder bed fusion for the medical device industry. On the screen, I have an example of an orthopedic implant manufacturing process flow or process map, where we have each individual step that's required in order to prepare an implant for production, going from the powder all the way to the completed part. We'll be going through each of these steps in the next few slides to give you insight of how a manufacturer must decide and select how to develop a manufacturing process flow and map when they are deciding to manufacture an implant for production. The first step would need to be first ordering the raw material or the powder. By putting in an order for powder, you have a material specification where you specify the material that you would like to purchase and utilize for your implant manufacturing, and you produce a purchase order, and you complete the order to receive the powder. Next, you receive the powder and inspect the powder, and all this you need to have written procedures and documentation for what powder was received, when it was received, how it was received, and how it was inspected before utilizing the machine and introducing it into your production line. And you have to sign off and approve of that individual material internally with another documentation and a procedure on how you are approving that material. After that, step three, storing that raw material. Storage of powder, of course, is very important, as if stored incorrectly, your powder may be introduced to the outside elements. It also could be stored improperly and unorganized, so you may have mislabeling of powder. So again, you have to have another procedure for how you're storing the powder, how you are, in terms of where you're storing it, the environment you're storing it, and how it's labeled as well. Once it's stored in place in your inventory, from there, you can prepare your actual machine for operation. That includes for preparing your build file, designing your build file, so what CAD files you are wanting to print, converting those to an STL, and having your procedures along the way of how you perform those steps. So just to really reiterate in the process, for when you're producing medical device implants, you need to ensure that you have procedures in place for each one of these processes and certifications of each of these to prove and demonstrate for future inspections that you have a stable process, that you have proper traceability of all these individual steps. And of course, for step four, the output will be a traceable build file that you would use to print your parts. Afterwards, you have your actual printing operation. You will put your build file on the machine, your raw material that you've already certified and included into your inventory, put that into your electron beam powder bed fusion machine, and print the build. So your output would be your printed parts. You then, of course, have your post-processing operations, such as removing your support structures, removing the powder around your parts, and then you would have your completed and printed parts that have been cleaned off and removed from the supports. But there's a lot further steps from there after you've completed all your printing operations, including secondary operations that you need to consider. Whether the company has these secondary operations in-house or they rely on a vendor, outside vendor to do those, you still have to have these in your manufacturing process map, recorded and including dated and all traceable for any regulatory bodies who may end up doing an audit and want to evaluate and have traceable data and documents to prove that you've done this correctly. You have those all available. So for secondary operations, your printed parts and your CNC equipment, or use a vendor that has that equipment, would go through the operations, have a dedicated procedure for surface finishing, machining, and all these procedures listed. And then, of course, certified finished parts, and including certs that these have been completed and inspected properly. And of course, 8 for inspected, you provide the parts, you do inspection for dimensions, ensuring that you're meeting the drawing requirements, and then you have your parts completely inspected from there. After the inspection, sometimes this step can be actually even before the inspection, is some type of labeling procedure. For a spinal implant, for example, what's commonly done is a laser marking. This could be a laser etching equipment or other equipment similar in order to have traceability for your individual parts. So you know when the part was printed, where it was in the build, where in terms of where location it is currently. Being able to have the parts traceable is very important because let's say later down the line you find out your build had an issue, or let's say your powder manufacturer has noted to you that there is an issue with the way they manufacture the powder that makes it no longer appropriate to use. You can then go down the line, determine for each individual implant if it was included in that individual build or powder lot that was utilized, and be able to remove that powder, remove that part from the production line, or inform your customer down the line to be able to tell them, okay, this part is no longer approved and must be removed from use. And that is one of the examples of why traceability and using things such as laser etch is very important. Lastly is a clean and passivate process. That's really to remove any potential machining oils, any fingerprints, anything like that that could be contaminated in the part that would end up deeming that part incapable of being implanted into an individual person. So a clean and passivation process. And then lastly, before any surgeries, there's a sterile pack process where clean and passivated parts are packaged and sterilized in order to be completed, packed, and shipped out to the final location before surgery. So that is a full orthopedic implant manufacturing process map, an example of one, and all the process steps that need to be considered before going ahead and before and after printing a part, including the printing operations. So for example, let's say you own a Joel JAM 5200 EBM machine. Steps 4, 5, and 6 would be the actual printing machine steps that would be involved and printing steps that would be involved. But outside of that, all the other steps would require different equipment, different operations, and different procedures. So just to note for that, and really to note overall for people that are considering additive manufacturing, is that additive manufacturing and electron beam melting, the printing process, is not the only step to produce the part. There is considerable requirements, procedures, and work instructions that must be developed. And the customer and the additive manufacturing user must develop their entire additive manufacturing process in order to achieve value from the technology. They can't just buy a machine and say we're going to print some implants and then from there not worry about the other operations before and after. They must develop their entire manufacturing process chain, process map, and then also qualify this additive manufacturing process. What I mean by qualify is prove that the process can consistently produce mechanical material properties that consistently produce mechanical and material properties that are overall consistent and repeatable. Go into more about qualification of electron beam powder bed fusion. In the next few slides, we'll be going over how the technology needs to be qualified or proved consistent in a production setting. And this is typically required before any implants can be produced and printed and utilized for potential customers and potential patients. So for an additive manufacturer machine owner that wants to print orthopedic implants in a production setting, there are many different steps that that user must do in order to be able to print orthopedic implants in a production setting. But however, for this lecture today, I'm going to going over only the general requirements to give you an insight of what a AM user must consider for the medical device industry. And one thing that each individual medical device user must do is perform what's called an IQ, OQ, PQ qualification process. IQ stands for installation qualification, OQ stands for operational qualification, and PQ stands for performance qualification. These steps are used in order to qualify your additive manufacturing process and prove that your machine and your process is consistent. The installation qualification, which I show here, is first proving that your machine was installed correctly and also in accordance with the manufacturer's intentions. What is usually done is after the machine has been installed, it is inspected and compared to your original manufacturer specification and proves that it is consistent and is intended. So, for example, what happens is the original manufacturer of the electron beam manufacturing equipment may perform a factory acceptance test or FAT, which is a test build to show that the machine is performing as expected. And then you perform that same build when that machine is placed at the user's site. They'll perform what's called a site acceptance test or SAT. The FAT and SAT are inspected and prove that they are built up to a certain degree of similarity between the two. And that, along with some other tests, prove that the installation qualification has been performed correctly the installation is correct and the machine is has been qualified in terms of the installation. Some other things that may be checked as well are certain calibrated gauges, that you have a specific trained operator program. Your operators have been trained and qualified by the original equipment manufacturer, that you've implemented safety requirements in conjunction with the original manufacturer, that you have a spare parts list, and that you use software in accordance to what the original manufacturer has recommended for use for the machine. The next step would be an operational qualification, or OQ. This is a process to develop and establish a process window, so for which all of your electron beam powder bed fusion printed parts requirements can be met. What I mean by process window is a window in which your machine can be able to print and still meet requirements. So for example, if you have certain process parameters that have a direct impact on the finished parts, including the finished part dimensional requirements, the finished part mechanical property requirements, the finished part density, if there are certain process parameters that could control those, you must have a window in which those process parameters can be adjusted or around and still meet those requirements. For example, your chamber pressure. Your chamber pressure is controlled by your vacuum pumps. Your vacuum pumps maintain a vacuum pressure that results in a specific and targeted chamber pressure. However, your vacuum pumps will not maintain the exact same chamber pressure all the way throughout the build. There's going to be some fluctuations in the melting. There's going to be some fluctuations based on the hardware. So therefore, you must establish what is the highest and lowest chamber pressures that you can still achieve and meet your mechanical, dimensional, material, and density requirements for your electron beam powder bed fusion process. So you establish that window by selecting what's called worst case conditions. You establish what worst case conditions or max and mins that you can choose, that you know you can still meet your mechanical requirements. You perform what's called operational qualification builds around those worst case conditions. So you may, let's say, choose a chamber pressure that is higher for a build, choose a chamber pressure that's lower, or even acceleration voltage. Choose a voltage that may be higher than the nominal or lower than the nominal, but still able to meet, still with the knowledge that you are still able to meet the mechanical property and any potential critical process requirements. You then do those builds at those worst case windows, and then from there, evaluate your critical to quality attributes, maybe your mechanical properties, maybe your material properties, and ensure that even if that window is at your worst case scenario, you're still able to meet your requirements. From there, you performed your operational qualification and confirmed that even if your process has fluctuations during the build, you're still, even with those fluctuations, even hit those worst case highs and worst case lows for your critical process parameters, you're still able to meet your specific property critical to quality requirements. Lastly, is a performance qualification. And a performance qualification's intention is to provide statistical evidence that the process is repeatable under normal operating conditions. What this means is that if you have certain selection of your critical process parameters, your selection of your standard process parameters, you have to prove that under the selection of your standard process parameters, that over a repeatable amount of time, your machine is able to meet the mechanical property requirements and prove that you're statistically that your process can demonstrate what's called process capability. And to the right, I have an example of what process capability means. Let's say you have a specific requirements for your mechanical properties. And let's say on the left, even though you have, you typically have a bell curve for your mechanical properties. If you have a consistent process, you may have your mechanical properties have a certain average, but of course you're going to have several outliers in the high side and the low side for your mechanical properties. But if your high and lows still go over the specification limits, as you can see on the left, your process is not a capable process. You have not established process capability. On the right, however, if you have a much more narrow sense of data for your bell curve, so even your highs and lows for your mechanical properties still are within the spec limits statistically, then you prove that your process is capable and then therefore have demonstrated process capability. And that is a requirement for the user. The user must not only just purchase a machine, they have to establish that their process is stable and they have a consistent process and a stable process between their builds and statistically prove that they have consistency. People typically perform this using a coupon process. They'll do a typical coupon builds. They'll do the builds repeated with repeatable process parameters again and again to prove that their process is capable. This isn't something that your original machine manufacturer must do. This is something for your individual machine at your individual site using your standard operations and your standard process parameters, something that you as a user would have to perform to prove the consistency before entering the medical device industry. A great example of this was a company called Orlicon AM, who utilized a facility in Connecticut in order to perform a process capability study on their two RKM 210 machines. They utilized two powder lots. They printed 7,600 parts and printed 152 printed coupons, which means two mechanical, one chemical, and one microstructural coupon across 38 builds to prove and demonstrate process capability on their machine. So they did all those tests and tested the coupons to confirm the process capability. Orlicon took the data that they collected and performed a process capability study, analyzing, in this case, yield stress and how it varies across multiple builds across both of their machines, both of their Q10 pluses. And as you can see, they generated using Minitab consistent statistical data on the variation of their yield stress, including histograms, probability plots, R charts, and additional data, really to show the consistency of their specific electron beam powder bed fusion manufacturing process. I encourage you, if you have some time, on the below, I have a link to the American Makes presentation where Orlicon presents a little bit about their additive manufacturing process that they developed for orthopedic implants and how they prove consistency of their overall additive manufacturing process. After this qualification has been completed and the installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification have been performed, a final report is typically drafted, which summarizes all of the IQ, OQ, and PQ protocols, which is how each individual qualification was performed, and results, which is the results of each individual qualification. From there, the management of the user that is looking to qualify their additive manufacturing machine must sign off on this qualification. And once this qualification has been performed, continuous validation must be performed on their additive manufacturing equipment to ensure that the process and the machine hasn't varied or changed over time. Typically, every year or so, they will analyze and review all the statistics of the machine to confirm that the process window and the variables inside the machine hasn't changed in terms of the mechanical properties, material properties, and density. Hasn't changed as the overall machine has been run between build to build. And then if there has been a major process change, let's say the electron beam gun has to be replaced. Let's say, for example, some major hardware change of the machine has been replaced, or even if the machine has had to be removed, that has been had to move from one location to another, that can sometimes trigger a revalidation, which is another potential qualification to prove that the machine is still as consistent as it was when it was originally qualified. On the right, just to give you some better an understanding of an IQ, OQ, PQ, these are the windows that typically each qualification tends to establish. First, the equipment capability on the right is on the outside window, proving that your machine is capable of what the manufacturer originally intended. You perform challenge conditions, which is a more narrow window, challenging that your machine can be your machine parameters can be slightly outside of the nominal conditions and still meet the requirements of the specific build, including mechanical material density requirements. Then lastly, your performance qualification is the original nominal settings. Your nominal settings that you utilize and prove that even with your individual nominal settings, you still have consistent mechanical material and density requirements, results as a whole. There are many more requirements that an additive manufacturing user wanting to get into the medical device industry has to consider. But with the timing for this lecture, we can only cover so much. But some other considerations that they would have too is ISO requirement, certification of the production site. The user would have to also require a quality management system, including operating procedures, work instructions, and procedures documented, signed off, and version controlled to show that they are ensuring quality inside their additive manufacturing machine, performing a process map, like you saw before, to map out each individual process that's required in their additive manufacturing site, and then the validation planning, which leads to the IQ, OQ, PQ process. And actually, that IQ, OQ, PQ process sometimes has to be performed on each individual process step, not just one step on the machine alone. The last part of my presentation will be involving focusing on additive manufactured lattice, what it is, how it's designed, how it's tested, and overall how it's qualified. But in order to talk about additive manufacturing lattice, let's back up and talk about what is lattice. What is a lattice or coating that goes on this implant? What is the structure that you see here, for example, in the middle that is usually put on implant designs? That's what's known as a porous coating. And porous coating is used to induce bone ingrowth and ongrowth between the individual bone and the implant. So that surface you see is what it makes contact with the bone and the implant. What is intended for that is that your bone will grow into that porous coating and then be a part of the implant from there. So that way it helps for surgery to connect the bone and implant, prevents loosening and dislocation of the implant, and allows for the implant to be more built into you. And as you can see on the right, for example, we have a hip stem. And the hip stem, when implanted into the bone, you have that connection between the porous coating and the bone and getting that connection. So as you can imagine, where that implant sits inside the bone you see on the right, all that good bone needs to be removed in order to fit that implant in. And in order to get that implant in the bone to have good fusion between the two, that porous coating helps the bone grow into it and to be overall a part of the bone. For traditional manufacturing, this is a secondary process that applies this porous coating. So they apply this coating after the individual implant has been manufactured and is a post-process step. There are multiple types of porous coatings that can be applied to traditionally manufactured implants. But one I'll show you on the video to the right is titanium plasma spray. And I'll show you a video of how this works. What you'll see is an operator pressing play and then titanium plasma spray being applied to acetabular cup. So you see the spray going on and the coating on the individual cup. So the spray and the spray being applied to the cup. And again, just to highlight the bone ingrowth mechanism between the porous coating and the implant. On the left side of the screen, the image, we have the implant on the top, and the bottom, we have the bone-facing surface. The porous coating is the white, the bone is the gray, and then the marrow cellular components are the black. And at the surgery, in the beginning, at the surgery, you have the porous coating making contact with the bone, but you have no bone growth initially. But after 6 months post-surgery, that lattice structure or porous structure allows for osseointegration and bone ingrowth into the uh, into the implant. So you'll see more of the gray on the right growing into the porous regions, and that allows for better bone fusion of the implant into the bone. And that is what's desired when you have the surgery. There are various types of coatings that are applied to traditionally manufactured implants, including sintered coatings and sprayed coatings. The most common ones currently to date right now are titanium plasma sprayed coatings, but there are also other coatings that are options that are chosen for implants. And actually, for some implants that are made from PEEK, which is a polymer type of structure, they use a titanium plasma spray on that to induce bone growth, bone ingrowth for PEEK spinal implants, which you can see on the right. However, as you expect, there are some certain weaknesses of porous coatings that are traditionally put on the on traditionally manufactured implants. As you can see from the video, the titanium plasma spray requires line of sight. It's a spray that requires the spray to have a line of sight application to achieve the desired effect. That makes it difficult to apply the coating to inner surface features and hard to get consistent thickness on certain regions. In addition to that, there are limited optimization that can be done for bone ingrowth compared to additive manufacturing lattices. And we'll cover some of the ways that at least additive manufacturing lattices can be more optimal and be designed optimally that are quite different to more traditional coatings and spray. As you've seen on previous slides, additive manufacturing can create this lattice structure uh, while it's printing. So essentially that lattice structure is part of the 3D printed part and acts as the porous coating for bone ingrowth. What's unique about the lattice structure is that you can design with CAD softwares, various software tools, different lattice structures that can be designed to meet different pore sizes, strut sizes, percent porosity, and really optimize for bone ingrowth. You can also design these as well for improved mechanical strength for specific loads. For example, a hip cup may need a different type of lattice structure that is more designed for higher loads versus a shoulder implant. You can also design these lattice structures for ease of powder removal and really up to the user to optimize the lattice depending on the application. In terms of the software tools, pore size and strut size can be defined, and there are various different software tools that can be utilized, such as Entopology, Within Medical, Altair Inspire, and others as well, to design the lattice structure that you need in order to design areas for the bone-facing surfaces. Some of the benefits of additive manufactured lattice, including electron beam melted lattice, it does offer a more osteogenic environment. Because the lattice structures can be optimized, you can actually make a much greater and available surface length and area for osseointegration. You actually make the percent porosity larger while maintaining the optimal pore and strut size for bone growth. That allows the bone to grow actually faster within the bone and actually have a better patient comfort because of faster bone ingrowth from the implant from the bone into the implant. And actually, in some cases, they have found expedited proliferation of the bone versus for an additive manufacturing lattice versus titanium plasma spray coatings. In addition to that, custom implants can utilize lattice structures quite easily. That allows custom implants to be designed with lattice much faster and allows for better recovery post-surgery. In terms of utilizing lattice, however, utilizing lattice in a orthopedic implant isn't just go ahead and select the lattice and design it and then go from there to qualify it and utilize it in a production setting. The FDA in the US does require testing for these traditional coatings, porous coatings, and additive manufacturing lattice. and the FDA does provide some guidance on the bottom right for how to test these lattices. For example, it gives recommendation on abrasion testing to confirm that under abrasive environments, the lattice does not lose any of its mass, compression testing, shear and tensile testing, including as well some fatigue testing for the lattice. The actual minimum requirements, so the ASTM specs I listed are for the individual tests, but the actual minimum requirements are typically created from what's called predicate implants. So previously, 510K approved implants that the FDA has approved for the market, typically customers will evaluate those already approved implants, what the FDA has previously approved for requirements, and make their individual lattice structures compliant with those already approved structures. That gives the developer of the lattice structure an insight of what the FDA expects for the minimum requirements for their lattice structures. And here we have an example of what would have to be performed in order to test the lattice structure. So this is a compression coupon that was printed using electron beam powder bed fusion. What happened was that it was printed, a lattice structure in this shape, placed on a test stand for where a static compression test was performed on the sample. And from there, analyzing the results of what compressive loads can be applied and withstood by that lattice, and then from there evaluating to see if that lattice met the specific requirements for the individual implant that it was being looked to be applied to. In summary, electron beam melting technology has considerable applications in the medical device industry. As I've shown you in these previous slides, there have been many companies that have utilized this technology in their production lines to be able to manufacture orthopedic implants, from spinal implants to femoral knees to hip stems, all because of some of the benefits of the technology. However, the future looks quite bright for the technology, and we do expect that electron beam melting and additive manufacturing overall will rise in the medical device industry due to the numerous technology benefits that the technology can have. In addition to that, electron beam melting as a technology has grown overall and will continue to grow in terms of the application, the material optimizations, the different materials that it can utilize, and really be the medical device industry really taking and using the design for additive manufacturing capabilities of designing implants specifically for additive manufacturing. I expect, and the market will expect, to improve orthopedic implants overall in terms of performance and be able to suit the growing need in the medical device industry as a whole. I'd like to thank you for your time, for listening to my presentation, and I encourage you, if you do have any questions on my content, please reach out to me. Thank you so much. Bye.